hope you all enjoyed this session as much as I did. Some really interesting perspectives from different areas. Can I take some questions from the audience first?
So one of the things that was sort of in the media quite recently was the buildup of pesticides in plants. And looking at the farming practices, are we looking at that at the moment, especially if we're going to encourage a population to move towards more plant-based products?
We've just been speaking to a guy called Dan Kitteridge at the Bionutrient Food Association, who is a sensible person worth following. He's actually working with Audacious at the moment to try and really bring to the fore how critical, especially in America and the UK, the glyphosate toxicity pieces in a lot of our foods, whether that's cereals or pasta. And it's so terrifyingly above the accepted levels in many cases that this will be an enormous revolution that I think will come out this year. Things like Oatly, for instance, are absolutely chronic in terms of the amounts that sit within them. So I think that data will be unequivocal and will force an absolute shift almost, I say overnight, but I would imagine very quickly.
This one work? Yeah. Yeah, one of the things we're really interested in is sort of crop relatives, because they're really rich in compounds that naturally fend off pests. So a lot of the crops that we're looking at tend to be crosses from land races or ancient relatives, because they don't need so much pesticides. And it's the same with hemp. I mean, none of our farmers are using pesticides on their hemp, and we need to reduce all of our inputs. So, you know, it's not just a case of, you know, there's an energy associated with pesticide development as well. So the more we can do to reduce that, the better. But I think there are some really good initiatives.
Any other questions?
Thank you. Very interesting presentations from a wide range of perspectives, so great session. My first question would be around food safety, which is something that we were discussing with some colleagues just earlier before this session, which we do really feel is under-researched. And my question is, why do you think that is? Because it's obviously evident that safety and hygiene issues have huge impacts. Communicable diseases have huge impacts in LMICs. They also affect the prevalence of undernutrition, because obviously, you know, chronic diarrhea, for example, in children is one of the causes of malnourishment. So why do you think that is? Why do you think governments and researchers are not paying attention to this topic, and what can be done about it?
That's a very beautiful question. Thank you. Food safety in low and middle income countries, it's across multiple sectors. Starting from the environmental sector, you would realize that a number of these countries have natural products, like the mining of gold, mining of mercury, and things like that. Most of these impacts not just the water bodies, but also bioaccumulating, like fishes. So if we are advising people to go to eat fishes, and also the bioaccumulating plants as well. If you're advising people to eat more fruits and vegetables, then how sure are we that these foods they are eating are actually safe for them? And the other challenge is the weight, the weakness of the healthcare system is not as very strong like in other high-income countries. So if we are not able to even detect this, diagnose this from the healthcare health system perspective, then that's another challenge. And also most of the spendings with regards to healthcare is out of pocket from low and middle income settings, unlike we have in high-income countries. So if we can tackle the challenge from a food safety point of view, environmental health, human health, plant health, people health, then we'll not have to get to the point where foodborne illnesses, food allergies are compounding on the healthcare system, which is sponsored out of pocket.
Thank you. Great presentations. I love it. I have a question for Christopher. The regenerative agriculture probably needs a bit more land, and that's something that's scarce. How do you look at that, and what are your solutions for that?
I mean, Jesus, easy question. I think the solutions are yet to be seen. If you listen to someone like Gabe Brown of Understanding Ag, do you guys know Gabe Brown? He headlined Groundswell, which is our big regenerative food and farming festival last week, with Prince William, which was an exciting show of sort of monarchical support, if nothing else. I think the roadmaps for farming regeneratively are based entirely on the context of that land and what's being grown. The piece that Gabe would argue is that the roadmaps for contextual regenerative farming exist now everywhere. So at least all over the UK and all over the US in his sense. How can we scale those initiatives is the big question. How can we provide financing, preferential lending? How can we convince farmers? How can we link farmers? How can we use technology within all of it? How can we, we have to shift a food system at the same time to be able to actually have markets to sell the produce that these farms would be selling, which would be very different to the current commodities or the current diet split that we have in the UK needs to shift with these evolving markets, i.e. we'd be eating more legumes, as an example, in this regenerative tomorrow. So the knowledge exists and the roadmaps exist. It's now how do we proliferate and work with technology and investment to make that happen.
Are you also investing in this shift towards more plant-based proteins?
So we invest into the enabling technologies. We can't buy land and we can't buy a real asset. So it has to be a pure tech play. Our issue with alt proteins is whatever's grown from a limited media will have a limited nutritional profiling. So whether that's clean meat or whether it's precision fermentation, actually feed it on a media as rich in diversity as a healthy soil would be cheaper to just grow something from healthy soils. So we're very much of the belief that we should be working with nature as opposed to tech for tech's sake.
Okay, thanks.
I guess sticking with the theme of regenerative agriculture, there is an online question that is relevant from Laura Jane Smith. There are differing views on the need for livestock within regenerative agriculture. Some great examples of livestock-free farming with thriving soil, high-input crop farming. Is that part of investment conversation?
Yeah. I mean, composting and returning microbial life to the soil, however it's done, is part of regeneration. And there's a lot of technology that's trying to either scale access to composting or to microbes in whatever way. Clearly, having herds that would mimic the herds of old, the 70 million bison of America, or 170 million bison of America, that would have roamed the Great Plains in a way that was building organic matter in the soil on a yearly basis, is very tough now. Livestock as a service is something that we will expect to see a lot more of in the UK and all over, where essentially livestock will they will have a very planned route over landscape scale areas, and farmers will pay for them to come and very intensely pee and poo and mulch seeds and move across their landscape. And yeah, I hope that went some way to answering that question.
That's great. There's one question here. Harriet, we're working you out today.
Hi, thank you very much for all the presentations. I guess I was going to shift the conversation to public procurement. Not sure if it's a question, a rambling thought, but it's kind of been on my head, and I was really happy to see that you've done kind of this systematic review of public procurement policies in Europe, because it seems like, well, it's a captive market. The government is giving money already. They're paying for it. Why not make sure that it's aligning with the policies? Like, what are we missing something? Is this the holy grail that no one has? Why hasn't it been, I guess, leveraged? Or I don't know if you've got any thoughts on that.
Actually, I think it's a good point. This is it actually seems like a key policy for food system transformation. But only in the last 5 to 5 years, 10 years, is actually is growing in popularity. In my other, I work half my time for the research consortium was called Health and Nutrition, which are evidence-based body of the School Meal Coalition. And this is a coalition of governments around the world that they want to scale up and improve their school meals. So it's about 100 governments that actually recognize the school meal are kind of key because you feed so many children and you can achieve so many things. So I think and there are more and more countries that use that. But because it doesn't make big headlines, I don't know, like, but it is a policy that is growing, but actually showing like when you were doing the systematic review, we were actually encountered a lot of studies where were not evaluated, but they show a lot of countries where they put sustainable public health procurement in the food policies. Actually, this in the last few years has become extremely popular, and actually Europe is quite advanced at that. There's a big shift, for example, in organic agriculture. If anything, there's been like the policy wheels is there. Maybe there's been not so much talk with the farmers, for example. That might there been a bit of controversy there, like. Because there is a political will to do that. There is like a policy there, but maybe they haven't put the enabling structure, and maybe they haven't talked enough on how to make this transition. They haven't made it clear that actually this is a good way to create a market. So, as you say, the market is there. You can put whatever you want in that market. And put the organic agriculture, but then without enabling the producer to switch to the organic agriculture. What does it mean? It's actually very expensive to get the organic soil association, for example. Here they have other other places. The other problem is the tender system. So often it's much more viable economically to procure from just a few big procurement places, and these tend to be the big ones. So the small farmers, they tend to be producers, they cut out of the system. So for example, cooperative are a good way to do that. So there are problems. It's worked as it is the holy grail, but you need to break the current system, because the current system is not made to facilitate this. And I think like in both Denmark and Sweden, they have different systems, and they are exploring that. But for example, in Brazil, they give like 30% of all the food that is procured has to come for public procurement. I think actually maybe only for schools, which is anyway by far the biggest meal provider in the government, has to be from smallholder farmers and family farms. Actually, they had to be family farms. So it's possible to make it a large scales, like if there is a political will to link that. But I agree, it's a holy grail, and often is not recognized. I think it's also is not recognized the potential goal. Maybe they're not emphasized enough, and like even us, we are working with the climate change committee is like there to give this advice. The government, they decided not to put this because they couldn't find enough evidence it works.
Thank you. There's a question online for Wendy. How do we consider adaptation when talking about investment in crop, soil, health, etc.?
How do we consider adaptation? Yeah, this is working, yeah. I guess for me, the issue I see is often initiatives are invested in agriculture or in consumers, and there's very few that address the whole supply chain. And I think if we want to adapt, we need to make sure we bring everybody on board, because what I've found is until supply and demand exactly balance, then nothing works when you're trying to adapt a food system. But as soon as you can get this supply and demand to map, then you're on a winner, really, I think. And I think that's one of the things that we have to do when we're looking at adapting crop systems, is to make sure that we're making sure the supply chains are in place for that product.
That's great. There's a question here.
Hi, thanks very much. Reggie Chivkaran from Faculty of Public Health. I think a question for Wendy and Christopher. It feels like the solutions are obviously within the public food procurement basis, but appreciating the difficulties mentioned about implementing that will need innovation and solution within that. And I think, for example, the hemp farming and the tech ideas will be needed to facilitate along the way. Do you have any reflections, thoughts on how to keep the industry and the business on track for improving nature and well-being versus switching back to the usual profit focus that will inevitably be extractive rather than productive, as it were?
If we could keep to 1 minute.
Sure, I think nature is really on the agenda in Scotland. It's one of the huge priorities is protecting nature. And I think as long as your government has really got that written into its charter, then everything we do has to consider nature alongside everything we do. So I think economy is really important, making sure we deliver economic opportunities for our growers and suppliers. But if it doesn't meet our nature targets, it's not going to happen. And I think it's down to governments to make sure they write that into their charters.
Yeah, well said. no small piece. I think if you ask Tim Lang about a food systems professor at King's on this subject, he'd argue that publicly procured food in the UK is 8%, I think, of total consumption. So it's still small. So it's not going to be the big turner, however great a story it is, that we need. So how do we get the confidence of corporates, regulation and consumer education and food culture to change at once? I mean, this is the billion-dollar question. The good news is that as the data comes out of what's actually in our food, all roads lead back to better farming practices. And that data is now, it will become prolific over the course of the next 5 years, if not decade. And what that will do to force a change in consumer behavior, it'll also it'll allow no space for corporates to hide. That's the real joy. And the progressive corporates will jump on it and run first with it. I'm not a fan of lots of these big food corporates, but lots of them watched their wheat supply chain dry up in East Anglia in 2022, as an example. And what did that do to force them to then look at how to restore their soils in East Anglia? And this is industrialized farming, so there's a long way to go. But it's interesting how that is an example of big food still being part of this pack, the new incumbents and the old, moving more aggressively towards systems that we like.
Thank you very much. Please join me in thanking all the speakers for today's session.